Close your eyes for a moment. Transport yourself back to the year 1400, while your European ancestors huddled in medieval villages, fighting over scraps of land and struggling through what history calls the Dark Ages. Something extraordinary was happening on the other side of the world. Something they never told you about in school. There was a city so magnificent, so advanced, so impossibly wealthy that when word of it reached Europe, people refused to believe it was real. They called it a myth, a fairy tale, an impossible fantasy. That city was Timbuktu. And here's what will make your blood boil. It wasn't a myth, it was real. And it was deliberately erased from history. The secret they buried in the sand. Picture this. While European scholars were arguing about how many angels could dance on the head of a pin, African professors in Timbuktu were teaching advanced mathematics, performing complex surgeries, and making astronomical calculations that wouldn't reach Europe for another 200 years. The University of Sankar was founded in 1332, a full 160 years before Columbus discovered America. At its peak, it housed between 100,000 and 700,000 manuscripts. That's more than existed in all of Europe at the time. Think about that for a second. Students traveled from Egypt, Morocco, Spain, and across the Islamic world, journeying thousands of miles across the brutal Sahara Desert just for the privilege of studying in Timbuktu. This wasn't some backwater settlement. This was the Harvard, Oxford, and MIT of the medieval world, all rolled into one magnificent city. The man who changed everything in 1312, a king named Mansa Musa, took the throne of the Mali Empire. His wealth was so staggering that when he made his pilgrimage to Mecca in 1324, he brought 60,000 men, 12,000 slaves, and so much gold that he single-handedly caused inflation across the Mediterranean. Historians estimate his wealth at $400 billion in today's money-making, him potentially the richest person who ever lived. But here's what they don't tell you. Mansa Musa didn't just hoard his wealth, he built an empire of knowledge. He returned from Mecca with the finest architects, scholars, and teachers he could find. He poured his fortune into building universities, libraries, and schools. He made Timbuktu into a beacon of learning that attracted the brightest minds from 3 continents. In Timbuktu's golden age, professors were celebrities, debated in the streets. Their lectures, attended by thousands of books, were more valuable than gold literally. A scholar's personal library could make them wealthier than a merchant medicine was advanced. Manuscripts show surgical procedures and anatomical knowledge Europe wouldn't possess until the Renaissance. Astronomy was sophisticated. Scholars made precise calculations of planetary movements, and eclipses law was codified. Complex legal systems governed everything from property rights to international trade. The city had 180 Quranic schools and countless private institutions. Knowledge wasn't hoarded by an elite, it flowed through the streets like water. Then came the darkness. By 1591, everything changed. A Moroccan army, hungry for Timbuktu's legendary gold, crossed the Sahara with guns and cannons. They conquered the city, they arrested the scholars, they dismantled the libraries. But that was just the beginning of the erasure. When European colonial powers carved up Africa in the late 1800s, they needed a story. A justification, a narrative that would make their brutal conquest seem noble. So they created one, the Dark Continent. They told the world that Africa had no history, no civilization, no achievements worth mentioning. That Africans were primitive peoples who needed European enlightenment. And Timbuktu? It became a punchline, a metaphor for the middle of nowhere, a joke. But here's the question that should haunt us. Was this an accident? The deliberate erasure. When French colonizers took control of Mali, they discovered the remaining manuscripts of Timbuktu. Thousands upon thousands of ancient texts, written in Arabic and African languages, containing centuries of accumulated knowledge. What did they do with this treasure trove? They shipped manuscripts back to Paris, they locked them in archives, they cataloged some. They destroyed others either deliberately or through neglect because they didn't understand or didn't want to understand. Their value, think about the timing. Timbuktu faded from global consciousness at the exact moment its manuscripts were being confiscated. While European children learned about Athens and Rome, African children were taught their ancestors contributed nothing to human progress. Coincidence? Some historians don't think so. Dr. Henry Louis Gates, Jr., the renowned Harvard scholar, has documented how the suppression of African achievement was systematic. It wasn't just ignorance, it was ideological necessity. You cannot colonize a people and simultaneously acknowledge they built great universities. You cannot enslave humans while admitting their ancestors were scholars and scientists. The narrative of African inferiority was essential to justifying centuries of exploitation, so Timbuktu had to be forgotten. The rescue mission nobody saw coming. Fast forward to 2012. Armed militants seized control of northern Mali, including Timbuktu. Reports emerged that they planned to destroy the remaining libraries, viewing the ancient manuscripts as un-Islamic. The world prepared to lose the last remnants of Timbuktu's legacy, but something remarkable happened. The people of Timbuktu, descendants of those ancient scholars, refused to let their heritage die. In secret, under threat of death, they began smuggling manuscripts out of the city. They hid them in footlockers. They buried them in the desert. They transported them across hundreds of miles of dangerous territory. Over 350,000 manuscripts were saved. When historians finally got access to these texts, what they found was stunning: advanced mathematics, geometric proofs, and algebraic concepts that matched or exceeded medieval European knowledge medical texts. Descriptions of surgical procedures, herbal medicines, and anatomical understanding that was centuries ahead of its time, astronomical charts, precise calculations of celestial movements, legal codes, sophisticated frameworks for governing diverse populations, historical chronicles, detailed accounts of trade, diplomacy, and cultural exchange with the wider world. And here's where it gets controversial. Some researchers claim certain manuscripts contain evidence of African contact with the Americas before Columbus. Now, before you dismiss this as conspiracy theory, understand that serious historians debate pre-Columbian contact. There are artifacts. There are questions mainstream archaeology struggles to answer. If Timbuktu's maritime knowledge was as advanced as some manuscripts suggest, transatlantic voyages aren't impossible. We don't have definitive proof. But here's what should terrify you. We don't know what we don't know. How much knowledge was lost? How many manuscripts were destroyed? What scientific breakthroughs, what medical advances, what historical insights were buried in the Sahara or locked away in European vaults? The 350,000 rescued manuscripts might be just a fraction of what once existed. Why this should make you angry? This isn't just about correcting history books. This is about understanding who controls knowledge and why they control it. For generations, people of African descent, particularly descendants of enslaved Africans in the Americas, were told a lie. They were told their ancestors contributed nothing to civilization, that Africa was always backwards, that they came from a continent of darkness. That narrative was used to justify the most brutal chapter in human history, the transatlantic slave trade. It was used to justify colonialism. It's still used today to justify discrimination and inequality, and it was always a lie. Timbuktu is the proof. When African Americans began learning about Timbuktu in the 1960s and 70s, it fundamentally changed their sense of identity. It said, "Your ancestors weren't conquered savages. They were scholars. They were builders. They founded universities. Your heritage includes towering achievement. But there's a deeper question here. How much else of history is a lie? If they could hide an entire civilization, universities, libraries, centuries of scholarship, what else have they hidden? What other narratives have been manipulated? Whose other voices have been erased?" The fight to remember today, there's a global movement to restore Timbuktu's legacy. The Ahmed Baba Institute in Timbuktu is working to preserve and study the manuscripts. International organizations are helping digitize these ancient texts. African universities are teaching the true history of Timbuktu, but it's an uphill battle. Many manuscripts remain in European institutions, slowly being released after decades or centuries. Some are damaged beyond repair, some were destroyed, and the world's textbooks still largely ignore Timbuktu. Most Americans have never heard of it. Most Europeans haven't either. Old lies die hard. What Timbuktu teaches us. Stand with me for a moment in the ruins of Timbuktu. The great University of Sankar still stands, its distinctive mud-brick pyramidal structure a testament to what once was. The libraries are mostly empty now, the scholars are long gone. But as the desert wind blows across those ancient walls, as the sun sets over the Niger River, ask yourself this. If there was a Timbuktu, if an entire civilization this advanced was hidden from us, what else do we know? Timbuktu teaches us that history is written by victors, that knowledge is power, that entire civilizations can be erased with nothing more than silence and selective storytelling. It teaches us to question everything we've been told about who built civilization, who contributed to human progress, who deserves to be remembered. The ancient scholars of Timbuktu understood something profound. Knowledge is eternal. It may be buried, hidden, suppressed, but it cannot be destroyed. Somewhere, somehow, the truth survives, and perhaps that's Timbuktu's greatest lesson. The city never truly vanished. It just waited buried beneath centuries of lies for us to be ready to remember. Now you know the truth. The question is, what are you going to do with it? The sands of the Sahara buried many secrets, but the greatest secret of all wasn't gold or treasure. It was knowledge. The knowledge that Africa wasn't a dark continent waiting for Europe to bring light. Africa was already brilliant, and they couldn't let the world know. Now you know, now we all know. Timbuktu was real, and it was magnificent.